The time is here, the time is now, and the time is right. It's time for us to talk about Once More Round the Sun by Mastodon. It's actually a shame that Pale Communion by Opeth was pushed back to August, because if it would have maintained its original date of sometime in June, it would have been the second straight time that we would have been speaking about both Opeth and Mastodon within the same month. It also happened in September 2011, when both bands' last albums, The Hunter by Mastodon and Heritage by Opeth, came out at the same time. Kinda cool. Also, if this were last year, this would probably be the review that would have capped off the 24 hours of Coverkillernation, as it took place right around this same time last year. And finally, it's going to happen again, the 24 hours of Coverkillernation, that is. And there's also a Mastodon discography review, where I talk about each and every album. And now I'm finally able to add this album to the list. So Once More Round the Sun by Mastodon, coming off of The Hunter, which I really feel divided some fans from, of this band. I really feel that The Hunter had this, power to showcase where Mastodon was kind of going creatively, while at the same time, a lot of hardcore, longtime fans kind of, listened to this album and peered into this album and thought to themselves, well, where's all the stuff that I remember, all the stuff that I know and love? I mean, yeah, it still sounds like Mastodon, this still feels like a Mastodon record, but it doesn't have that same vibe. It kind of has a little bit of a different makeup to it. I have a feeling that those people who were a little bit against the idea of The Hunter and what it was able to produce may come back a little bit with Once More Round the Sun, but also feel as though, and recognize very quickly, that The Hunter sound and the evolutionary step that they took with The Hunter has definitely continued a little bit. So this is one that, if you weren't a big fan of The Hunter, Once More Round the Sun may actually be a grower for you. It may be a grower for you just overall as well. It was for me. I'm going to be the first person to admit that the first time that I listened through to this album, there just didn't seem to be much of, memory. The singles were great, don't get me wrong. High Road still, to me, seems like it's pretty simplistic, but it is still a nice hard-nosed rocker. But at the same time, I left that experience not really sure about how I felt. So instead of just, rushing out and reviewing, I like to do a couple of different listens first, and ever since then, my opinions have definitely become a little bit more, well-shaped. The way in which I can really identify Once More Round the Sun is definitely as a logical conclusion to the Hunter idea. This is instead one where they're going to shape a lot of the ideas that they had for Once More Round the Sun with kind of the Hunter with a little bit of memory in mind, but at the same time, they're really starting fresh. There's a lot of that same style that you have heard with some of the previous records, especially The Hunter, present on Once More Round the Sun, but with a little bit more of a building block, with a little bit more of a dynamic. This is an album that, instead of really highlighting the fact that they're able to write, killer material in the range between 3 and 6 minutes, they're able to expand things a little bit more, go into the 5, 6, and 7 minute range a little bit more often. Now, this is something that actually really showcases more of a crack-the-sky philosophy as opposed to The Hunter or, Leviathan or Remission. I'm just going to name everything. Blood Mountain. I forgot that one. It happens. However, this is also one where this really boosts up the variety a little bit. Instead of feeling like you're just, rushing through a bunch of 3-minute tracks that, have a killer catchy vibe to them and things like that, either that or just have a really solid makeup whenever it comes to their heavy metal philosophy. Instead, this is one that feels like it's a more varied affair. It's one that definitely has a lot more to offer a listener. Principally because the songs that you figure would be more of an expanding of the composition that would have a little bit more of an expansive view, instead Mastodon decides to throw the curveball and just rock out throughout the whole entire piece. And that's definitely a nice touch. It's definitely something that you don't see all of that often. You see it more often than not whenever bands have lengthier tracks that they tend to slow things down. Either that or they tend to do everything in their power to ensure that they don't waste the time. With Mastodon, on the other hand, they have no fear. They're a fearless band right now, where they know that even if they produce a 7-minute and 45-second long track, such as Diamond in the Witch House, the closing track off of this album, they feel that they have the confidence, not to mention the ability, to fill all of that time with great material, regardless to the tempo, regardless to the melody. They have a plan in mind that they are going to execute, and they executed it very well. Tread Lightly and The Motherlode, which kick off this album, showcase one of my favorite aspects about Mastodon's sound, and it's something that occurs within the chorus structures. I love the fact that these guys are able to harmonize vocally with such a fantastic resonance. It's to the point where on the mother load, the harmony that you hear almost reminds you a little bit of Ozzy Osbourne. Yeah, listen to it closely, and then listen to some of Ozzy's material, especially whenever you get into, I would say, the latter 80s, early 90s, before his voice started to break down a little bit, and you'll definitely know what I mean. Or you might just think I'm crazy. Either way, I accept it, but it's something that definitely, crept into my mind whenever I heard it, and it was certainly something I felt was pretty cool. I like the fact that their harmony is able to give me that callback, and at the same time, on a musical level, they're able to write just, kick-ass stuff. They're able to write just kick-ass riffs. And the riffing, by the way, if it doesn't remind you of basically an embodiment of their career, if it doesn't remind you of different portions and times of their career, then I don't know what you're listening to, because I'm definitely getting a lot of callbacks. Now, granted, a lot of my callbacks are being hearkened more toward the more recent memory, but let's face it, they're in a musical direction right now that has taken them, basically down that pathway. However, you still have little glimmers and moments that tread you all the way back to the earliest versions of Mastodon. Of course, we talked about High Road once before. We talked about it whenever the song first broke, and it definitely had a simple sound to it, but like I said, once again, it has a very, very nose-to-the-grindstone, high-fist rock value to it, and that's something that still maintains itself on the disc. It's actually one of those songs that feel like one of the weakest tracks on the disc, and whenever one of the weakest tracks happens to be the single, that actually bodes pretty well for you, because it means that the remainder of the material is going to make the album very, very worth it. You're going to feel very rewarded for listening to the entire disc. And it's definitely one to take in a singular setting, and then repeat, as you go. I really like to, cite songs such as Chimes at Midnight, Once More Around the Sun, I'm not necessarily, just dismissing this track, since it's only 3 minutes in length. I feel that it actually fulfills a very keynote role. The very first 3 tracks on this album really give you this, really open feeling. It's something where it feels very, what's the word that I'm looking for? It feels very relaxed, but at the same time, it has a fury to it all of its own. You recognize the fact that this is an evolved version of Mastodon. Once More Around the Sun, the title track gives you a little bit more of a cool down period, even though it's something that really breaks through very furiously. And then you start to get into some really dense and layered material with Chimes at Midnight and Asleep at the Deep, with 2 tracks that are clocking in at close to 12 minutes in length whenever you combine the 2 together. And then you start to get into just some weird stuff, such as Feast Your Eyes and Aunt Lisa and Halloween. Whenever you look at these song titles, you gotta just be thinking to yourself, where the fuck are they going with this? What you got are some dynamic riffs, some fantastic soloing, and once again, just solid Mastodon material. This is definitely something that, if you're not a huge or major fan of this album the first time that you listen to it, if it's something that just doesn't feel like it has that much of a memory to you, it's one that you have to just keep on keeping with. It's definitely one that you have to just keep exploring. And, if you're a Mastodon fan, you're going to want to do that anyway. It's going to be hard for you to imagine that your favorite band has, released a stinker. And they haven't. This is actually an album that, while I probably wouldn't place it as high up as The Hunter, I have to also be honest with myself. Ever since my review of The Hunter a couple of years ago, it's definitely one that's kind of been the curious member of my collection that only comes out every so often. I typically listen to Crack the Sky. I just absolutely love that album, and Blood Mountain's pretty close behind. However, I feel that Once More Around the Sun is going to be one that I'm going to be busting out a whole hell of a lot more than, perhaps, The Hunter, within the period of time between Once More Around the Sun and whatever we get next from Mastodon. Whether that's, here in 6 months like originally planned, or if it happens to be another 3-year wait. Overall, I feel that this album has many, many strengths, and its weaknesses are really kind of minute. The main weakness that I would probably cite is the fact of what I've already mentioned. It's something that the first listen just doesn't conjure very much in the way of memory. However, its reward really comes with repeated listens. So this is an album, should I say, that you really can't give up on. You can't just immediately dismiss it after one listen. I feel as though that there's been a nice leap between this and The Hunter, though I also feel that it's very individual, which is definitely a strength. I would put that in the strength department. It's one where they've definitely found a way to craft something new with every album, because whenever you consider where they have gone from Blood Mountain to Crack the Sky to The Hunter to now Once More Around the Sun, Nothing really feels like they've gotten pigeonholed into a certain, sound or a certain locale. This is instead something where they're able to take their pre-existing, very, very well-respected and well-liked sound and morph it and tweak it and play with it a little bit. It's kind of like they're playing mad scientist with their own sound, and it's definitely something that's working. On future releases, I would definitely like to see what the next direction happens to be, and I would like to see the exploration that takes place. One thing I liked about the Hunter that I felt was a little bit missing here was kind of like a space prog odyssey feel that I got with a couple of tracks on there. That's definitely something I'd like to see re-explored, but that's mainly just a selfish hope, a selfish longing on my behalf. It's definitely not something that I'm demanding. This is an album I would definitely give an 84 out of 100 to, and you might think that that's a little bit weak, but really it's one that's very, very generous. It's one that I give, with, all of my heart and mind. This is definitely an album that, for the very ADD listener that is not going to give things a chance, may fall by the wayside. However, for those who are very cautious, more curious, and, really want to re-explore albums multiple times with multiple takes, perhaps under multiple conditions, man, this is one that certainly rewards. And that's what I definitely hope that most of you do. I hope that you, take in this album and just absolutely, swallow it whole a couple of different times. Just like the whale. Just like Moby Dick. Yeah, I totally made that joke just so I could say dick in a video. So, what did you think about Once More Around the Sun? What do you think about this album? What's your favorite track? What do you like the most about Mastodon? Oh yeah, there's one other thing that you should know. This album's available now. Yeah, Monday release. Those are awesome. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace. Ow.